All right, everyone, let's come to Samson Agonistes and the conclusion of that great text today. We left off, we just sort of dipped our toes into it. We'll try and get through it this time. I said that the interesting aspect of the story of Samson is actually contained in the title. The Agonistes refers to the conflict, but the conflict is an internal conflict as much as anything, which you'll all know, or at least if you've been in my classes, you will know how important Milton was to the Romantic authors. Not just because he's an epic poet, but I think his interest as in psychology is one of the things that draws the Romantics to him as well. So the idea of the paradise within, happy or far, and then the inner conflict that Milton's Satan exhibits, and that we can see are part of the dialogues between Satan and Christ in Paradise Regained, and also within Samson himself. I said that this is a tragedy, but really it's not meant to be performed. It's sort of what would be called a closet drama. It's dramatic insofar as it has various characters. It's tragic in that sense as well, in the sense that it follows the plot line of a tragedy. It has a hero that falls and bears the marks of the tragedy that Aristotle delineates. But having said that, the greatest temptations are within Samson himself, and we can see as Samson is approached by various figures who are really trying to comfort him as much as anything, rather than beat him down. The main struggle is within himself and his sense of fulfilling the calling he has to be the deliverer of Israel, even though he begins the whole tragedy in chains and blind. And we commented that in many ways this would be a fair reflection on Milton's own state at this stage in his life. This is his final work, not that he would have known that, but he has spent his at least much of his life working in politics, not as something that he felt called to, at least not from the outset of his life, but more of a sense of a duty, a civic mindedness to serve in Cromwell's government. Well, Cromwell's government is now I wouldn't say it's been defeated, it's over, because Cromwell is dead and the Republic has ended. Charles II has returned and has restored a lot of the very things that the Republic was there to get rid of, and mainly the religious elements that Milton had so abhorred, along with many of the Puritans. So the Catholicism that had seeped into Charles I's regime have returned under his son. And now Milton finds himself defeated, apparently, because he's under house arrest and blind. And yet, the question is, since the battle is the Lord's, and he thought all along that the Republic of Cromwell was furthering God's designs, if it is so, then is it possible for God to be thwarted, even if he is himself in chains, and if he himself is blind? Now, Milton is not in chains, by the way. He's under house arrest, so he just can't leave the house. He met Galileo early in his years as a young man, also under house arrest, and Galileo lived for a good number of years in that state, and people were allowed to visit him and so forth. He was just not allowed to his former liberty. So that's the state of Samson, and it similarly is the state of Milton. And the Agonistes that takes place is really the turmoil within him about a sense of vocation and promise that has as yet been fulfilled. And so on that level, it's an interesting study in the psychology of I guess we would say here, a Christian then. It's Milton, but even for Samson, someone who believes in the God of Israel, and his calling for him in particular just like Milton felt from an early age called to write a grand epic poem, and latterly to be a part of a Republican government that would improve the culture of England and reform its religion and its civic and cultural discourse. Remember, he wrote Areopagitica to that end, although it was rejected by Parliament. We see it now as the great defense of free speech. It had no effect in his day. So all of his life's efforts up to this point we may look back on with as this is terrific stuff, but actually he's seen no fruit from it whatsoever, which is really interesting. I mean, with the hindsight, we can say the great John Milton, one of the great poets of the English language, he thought of himself that way, but his contemporaries were not really lauding him that way. You'll see the same thing in the lives of missionaries. I think, what's the name of the great missionary of Africa again? Livingstone. I don't think he ever actually saw any converts. And I know that there are others, certainly in the South Pacific, similarly, that worked for decades and decades and decades and saw no conversions at all in their own lifetimes. And then latterly, with the benefit of the hindsight of history, these are hailed as gigantic figures, titanic for what they did in reforming and preparing the ground for others. And I think Milton would have experienced something similar to this. And so Samson has a similar sort of state presented to himself. So that's just interesting, the psychology of someone who is assailed from within and from without, so is under duress, is suffering, and feels impotent in his own powers, and yet through that impotence and through that sense of suffering is being pushed towards greater trust and confidence in the power of God. Because that's what this is about. As the story progresses, the character of Samson makes internal progress. His mind and his awareness of God's purposes in his life are advancing quite rapidly, in the same way that we saw this with Adam. When Adam falls, at first he blames Eve for everything. She blames him for everything. And then there's a slow rehabilitation process in books 10, 11, and 12, and by the end of it, he's rejoicing in what has happened. And he has said that if he adds deeds answerable to his knowledge, he will have a paradise within him happier far, which is better than what he just lost. And he is consoled with that thought. So there's an educational process that is being undertaken within the mind of the character, in that case Adam, in this case Samson, which is also true of Milton's own probably understanding of how God is working in his life, and it is similarly a consolation to people who read it now. And it redefines, remember we talked about the redefinition of heroism as well. Classical heroism is beating down your enemies and being victorious. The sort of Christus Victor model, or Christus Pantocrator, the ruler of all things. All things are under his feet. But Milton is not satisfied with that view. He sees the importance of suffering and atonement, and in following Christ's own path, bearing his own cross, and his weakness being used by God for the purpose of manifesting his strength. So it's the Via Dolorosa, the path of suffering, or in this case, the Agonistes within the mind of Samson, who was renowned for his physical strength. So that's where we left it off, with that sort of that general framework laid down. And he actually goes so far as to say that he prefers slavery to freedom. It's a difficult, it's an arduous path, and yet it makes him aware that his freedom is not really dependent upon him, but upon God. He's thrown upon God's strength because of his own weakness. Remember, the Apostle Paul writes many of his letters, particularly his latter letters, from letters from prison. And in particular in Philippians says, "For me to live is Christ and to die but gain." And speaks of the fact that God is working through his life, even in the midst of being in fetters. The other prisoners are speaking to him. God is working not to deliver him from prison, but working through him within prison, which is an extraordinary thing. It goes totally contrary to the way the world operates. So those things here. And Samson will ultimately deliver Israel by demonstrating the strength that lies within him. Now, he's not sure what the God of Israel is planning for him, by the way. Remember he has had two confirmations, two angelic confirmations, which means that it's certain that he will be the deliverer. But he, at this point, has no idea how he's going to bring that about. He has no idea. He begins apparently defeated as the story progresses. Remember, it takes place over a 24-hour period, as Milton says at the outset. He grows in an awareness that the deliverance will come through his own degradation and death. Although I don't think he intentionally brings his own death upon himself. He does bring the death of his captors on them, and he just happens to die in the process. Comments or questions so far? This seems to me vital because it does demonstrate the themes that we've seen throughout the entire course, from the beginnings of the Nativity Ode, the humble origins of God, the darksome clay in which he puts his own eternal life, the humility there, the apparent contradiction of the power of God in the mortal man. And Milton sees that at the outset as already the victory of God over all circumstances. Now that he's matured, he seems to have a greater awareness of the importance of suffering, not just for Christ, but for all of his people that follow him. That's a greater emphasis. So there's a difference maybe between a young man and an older man. The path of the cross is not one that he can avoid. It's Dietrich Bonhoeffer that said that when Christ calls a man, he bids him come to die. Die to himself. That's really a paraphrase of Christ's own word. Anyone who would, if anyone believes in me, he would pick up his cross and follow me. So Christ has borne his cross, we too will have to bear our crosses. Samson is bearing his cross, not literally, but figuratively, by being in chains and suffering. So, no comments or questions then. Okay, so what we get then is a developing sense within Samson of an understanding of God, and it grows and becomes stronger and stronger. At first it's probably shaken by circumstances, as he is comforted by others and as he rejects their comforts as distractions from his vocation. His strength of his convictions becomes unshakable. So that's what is growing. It's his sense of conviction. So the would-be comforters are in fact impediments to his vocation, which in this case is to bring down the temple of Dagon on his head. Not what he intended at all. At the outset, for sure. So when Manoah comes in, line 340, he says, "Oh, miserable change! Is this the man, that invincible Samson, far renowned, the dread of Israel's foes, who with a strength equivalent to angels walked their streets, none offering fight, who single combatant dueled their armies, ranked in proud array, himself an army, now unequal match to save himself against a coward armed at one spear's length? Oh, ever-failing trust in mortal strength, and oh, what not in man deceivable in vain? Nay, what thing good prayed for, but often proves our woe, our bane? I prayed for children, and thought barrenness in wedlock a reproach. I gained a son, and such a son as all men hailed me happy. Who wouldn't be now a father in my stead? Oh, wherefore did God grant me my request, and as a blessing with such pomp adorned? Why are his gifts desirable, to tempt our earnest prayers, then given with solemn hand as graces, draw a scorpion's tail behind? For this did the angel twice descend? For this ordained thy nurture holy, as of a plant, select and sacred, glorious for a while, the miracle of men, then in an hour ensnared, assaulted, overcome, led bound, thy foes' derision, captive, poor, and blind, into a dungeon thrust, to work with slaves. Alas, methinks, whom God hath chosen once to worthiest deeds, if he through frailty err, he should not so o'erwhelm, and as a thrall subject him to so foul indignities, be it but for honor's sake of former deeds. So Manoah, his father, is questioning God's goodness. His father's words probably might be reflecting the temptations within Samson's own mind. The fact that his father utters them allows Samson to question them as an outsider, even though it's reflecting upon him, and then to reject the thought. So as I say, it's a closet drama. These may be thoughts within Samson's own mind. I'm not saying literally they are so, but what's really being questioned is Samson's where Samson's heart is. And who better than his father to express them? So Samson's response, appoint not heavenly disposition, Father. Nothing of all these evils hath befallen me, but justly. I myself have brought them on. Sole author I, sole cause. Note the difference between Samson and Adam here. Yes, evils have befallen me, but it's my fault. There's no blame shifting here, right? So there's the difference between Adam, at least at the outset of his fall, and Samson here. Samson is entirely admitting of how he has brought these evils upon himself. So don't blame God for this. Remember, Adam did. That woman whom you gave me. Yes.
I was going to say he's more like Eve in that manner.
Sure.
Eve
as she begins, and then Adam as he, again, Adam himself develops as a character. So once he finally confesses his sin and admits, then he can start to recover what has been lost. And the one thing that he recovers most of all is an awareness of how God has been gracious to him, undeserving. It was always the case, but now he's aware of it, because before he had done nothing wrong. Now he's done what is unforgivable, and yet he has been forgiven. So he has a greater knowledge of God's love. This is the what the theologians call the felix culpa, the happy sin, or the fortunate fall. God himself comes, or will come, to save him. God himself will bring the paradise, and now it'll be within him rather than all around him. So, but he is sole author I, sole cause. If aught seem vile, as vile hath been my folly, who have profaned the mystery of God, given me under pledge of vow, and have betrayed it to a woman, a Canaanite, my faithless enemy. It's all his fault. He admits it. Manoah says, I cannot praise thy marriage choices, son, etc., etc. So a discussion between those two back and forth. But the father is like most fathers with their sons, with their children, softer on them than they probably deserve. So he's a loving father. Yes, you've made mistakes, but the outcome, and there's something in what Manoah says here, by the way, that the state in which you have fallen hardly seems fair, considering what you did. So yes, those are your misdeeds, but how about the things that you did as a deliverer? You fought the God's enemies. You've battled against Dagon and all of the Philistines. You've been a one-man army, taking the fight to them and basically drawing the fight away from Israel. Remember I said last time, the Philistines have iron swords and iron weapons, and the Israelites have bronze ones. It's like a hot knife through butter. They're just carving through them. There's no means that they can defend themselves with it. And if you actually understood the cultural reference, Samson's like Rambo. You know, he's just like going around in the one-man army. Never mind. All my cultural references are obsolete, and I am nothing approaching cool, which...
I'm not old enough to know that.
Yeah, no, fair enough, yeah.
Brought back Rambo.
How do you not know Rambo? My dog was named Rambo.
Your dog? Really? Okay. Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's not worth saying. Don't worry. It's a one-man, take on a whole army with a machine gun type stuff. Yeah. And that's what. So it's the one man against the an entire nation, and as a deliverer of it, and that he had done. And his father says, "This is what you have done." And you've done so not out of a selfish sense. You've done so because God's honor has been questioned by the Philistines. Dagon, as he says in 462, hath presumed me overthrown to enter lists with God. Said this is Samson. His deity comparing and preferring before the God of Abraham. He, be sure, will not connive or linger thus provoked. That is the God of Israel. But will arise and his great name assert. Dagon must stoop, and shall ere long receive such a discomfit as all shall quite despoil him of all these boasted trophies won on me, and with confusion blank his worshippers. So this is an extraordinary assertion from Samson in chains. Who is going to do this? After all, he's the one who's the deliverer. How is this going to happen then? He doesn't know, but he's certain that it is going to happen. And all the more extraordinary. He's blind and in chains. How then is he going to do this? Samson's absolutely certain. Extraordinary. And Manoah, with cause, this hope relieves thee. And these words I as prophecy receive. For God, nothing more certain, will not long defer to vindicate the glory of his name against all competition, nor will long endure it, doubtful whether God be Lord or Dagon. But for thee, what shall be done? So Manoah thinks, yes, that will happen. I take it as a prophecy, but how about you, my son? And he thinks that it will not have anything to do with Samson. Samson is not making that statement. That's his father saying, well, it can't be you, because you're blind and in chains. Of course it's not going to be him. Thou must not in the meanwhile here forget, lie in this miserable, loathsome plight, neglected. So what has he done? He has gone to ransom his house. Get him out of prison. You've done your service. Now I'm going to take care of you. You're going to get the pension due to those who have fought for the army of Israel, more or less. So that's Manoah, and the discussion between him and Samson in the chorus arises thereafter. It gives way rather than to Samson in the chorus, and I'll skip over that by and large. And Delilah enters the scene. Let me deal a bit with this. This is the chorus introducing her, and I'll pick it up at 7:11 or 7:10. But who is this? What thing of sea or land? Remember by this point, and I've said this repeatedly in classes, as God creates the waters as well as the land, as well as the sky, etc. The waters are not evil, but as Scripture develops, the sea becomes more and more strongly associated with evil. And Dagon is a sort of a fish god, and thereby connected to that evil. When Jesus walks on the water, the word in Greek is thalassa, sea. He's walking on the sea. A sea is made of water. You say, so what? Well, he's walking on a symbol, something that's been so strongly associated with evil. It's demonstrating that God has power over evil. He's putting it under his feet, in other words. Remember, in the new heaven and the new earth, one of the things we're told in Revelation 21 is that there, in the new heaven and the new earth, there will be no more sea. The sea's gone. Along with death and sickness and pain and crying, there's no more sea. You think, but the sea, what's wrong with the sea? I mean, death, crying, pain, I got all that. That's evil. But how about the sea? Well, it's as I say. That's why. So there's water there, just not the sea, which symbolizes the evil, which has now been eradicated from the new heavens and the new earth. So what thing of sea or land is this? Female of sex, it seems, that so bedecked, ornate, and gay comes this way, sailing like a stately ship of Tarsus, bound for the isles of Javan or Gadir, with all her bravery on, and tackle trim, sails filled, and streamers waving, courted by all the winds that hold them play. An amber scent of odorous perfume her harbinger, sent a damsel train behind, rather some rich Philistine matron she may seem, and now, at nearer view, no other certain than Delilah thy wife. So Delilah appears as a ship or a vessel. When she does appear, she claims, and I left off with this comment, she claims feminine weakness has led her to do what she did. Frailty, curiosity. I did this because I was the weaker sex. Forgive me, Samson. Samson, my wife, my traitress, let her not come near me. Yet on she comes. She stands and eyes thee fixed, about to have spoke, but now with head declined like a fair flower surcharged with dew, she weeps, and words addressed seemed into tears dissolved, wetting the borders of her silken veil. But now again she makes address to speak. With doubtful feet and wavering resolution I came, still dreading thy displeasure, Samson, which to have merited without excuse I cannot but acknowledge. Yet if tears may expiate, though the fact more evil drew in the perverse event than I foresaw, my penance hath not slackened, though my pardon no way assured. But conjugal affection, prevailing over fear, and timorous doubt, hath led me on, desirous to behold once more thy face, and know of thy estate, if aught in my ability may serve to lighten what thou sufferest, and appease thy mind with what amends is in my power, though late, yet in some part to recompense my rash but more unfortunate misdeed. And he says, out, out, hyena. And then the footnote tells us that hyenas allegedly enticed men by imitating men's voice just to draw them near and to devour them. So he suspects further malice. And then she comes the words that I summarized. Yet hear me, Samson, not that I endeavor to lessen or extenuate my offense, but that on the other side, if it be weighed by itself with aggravations not surcharge, or else with just allowance counterpoise, I may, if possible, thy pardon find, the easier towards me, or thy hatred less, first granting, as I do, that it was a weakness in me, but incident to all our sex. So again, it's women's weakness. Curiosity, inquisitive, importune of secrets, then with like infirmity to publish them, both common human or both common female faults. So first of all, my own weakness, and secondly, I'm a gossip. But then, so again, are all women. so says Delilah. Samson's response is just to totally reject this. He's not even going to meet the objection. He has such contempt for it. In other words, the person that is denigrating women and the female sex is actually the female figure of Delilah. This is not Samson. It's also not Milton. Samson, 8:19. How cunningly the sorceress displays her own transgressions to upbraid me mine. That malice not repentance brought thee hither. By this appears. I gave, thou sayest, the example. I led the way, bitter reproach. But true, I to myself was false, ere thou to me. So she accuses him in the same way that Eve accused Adam. But note that he doesn't do what Adam did in response to Eve, which is to be a misogynist. Samson is not falling for this. It's not the fact that she's a woman that has led her to do this. It's the fact that she is more like the whore of Babylon. So she's a certain type of woman. Worldly comforting, a serpentine figure. That's what has brought this about, not that she is a woman. So note, as I say, Milton doesn't address it directly because it's not worthy of being addressed. And Samson, likewise. So I only draw your attention to that because feminist critics are very poor on these things. They can't really see distinctions being made. That's simply male versus female or this sort of malarkey, and that's just, I think, not true to a biblical understanding. It's not true to Milton's own understanding. So she makes a false claim about women, a degrading one, and a worldly one at that, and he rejects all of these just simply by pretending he didn't even hear them. What he does hear is that she blames him for it. And her response, going back to her own argument, 8:43, since thou determinest weakness for no plea in man or woman, though to thy own condemning, hear what assaults I had. So she understands that he's rejected her argument. You weren't weak, you were wicked. Weakness does not lead to wickedness. After all, Samson is now weak, and he is not wicked. Or if he is wicked, the wickedness was in his own betrayal of his secret, which is not much of a wickedness. It's a trust in someone that didn't deserve his trust, and a trust that he had no business betraying, furthermore, because it was a secret for him that God gave him. The secret, the power of your strength lies in your hair. So that is interesting. And I'll just skip over that unless some of you want to dally further on Delilah. Dally on Delilah, do you like that? If not, then we will proceed. No? Hearing none. The chorus. The chorus in general, here as elsewhere in tragedy, speaks as the public. It changes as events develop as well. So the chorus is not just like a worship chorus, evangelical chorus, saying inane words repetitively. The chorus speaks to the public mind, and that changes as the drama unfolds. So the chorus's response to her departure, 997, she's gone, a manifest serpent by her sting, discovered in the end, till now concealed. Summary statement. So let her go, said Samson. God sent her to debase me and aggravate my folly, who committed to such a viper his most sacred trust of secrecy, my safety, and my life. Now this is interesting, because by identifying her with a serpent or a viper, he's identifying her in some way with Satan. She's his adversary, but also in one sense God's adversary. Interesting. I don't think accidental associations there. And then the chorus's comment, yet beauty, though injurious, hath strange power. After offense returning, to regain love once possessed, nor can be easily repulsed, without much inward passion felt, and secret sting of amorous remorse. Now this is the chorus's comment, but it's not, it's a wise commentary here. When it says inward passion, it doesn't mean feeling, it means inward suffering felt. And where's the suffering? It's in the repentance that Samson must experience in order to repulse her. Note that he can't see her. So the beauty being referred to is the attraction that drew him to her to begin with, which was not only in her physical beauty. And then Samson, love quarrels often pleasing, concordant, not wedlock treachery endangering life. And then the chorus, finally, it is not virtue, wisdom, valor, wit, strength, comeliness of shape, or amplest merit that woman's love can win, or long inherit. But what it is, hard is to say, harder to hit, which way soe'er man refer it. Much like thy riddle, Samson, in one day or 7, though one would musing sit. If any of these, or all, the Timnian bride hath not so soon preferred, thy paranymph, worthless to thee compared, successor in thy bed, nor both so loosely disallied their nuptials, nor this last so treacherously had shorn the fatal harvest of thy head, is it for that such outward ornament was lavished on their sex, that inward gifts were left for haste unfinished, judgment scant, capacity not raised to apprehend or value what is best in choice, but oftest to effect the wrong. So now the chorus is speaking the misogynist line. Women have long hair. Is it for this reason? Because of the infirmity of women or their tendency, the greater wickedness? Or was it too much of self-love mixed, or constancy no root infixed, that either they love nothing or not long? Note that the reference to women's inconstancy, very common in Shakespeare's day, very common in Milton's day. Is this a reflection of Milton's own view, or is this the reflection of the public mind? I would say it's of the public mind and not of Milton, myself. Whate'er it be, to wisest men and best, seeming at first all heavenly under virgin veil, soft, modest, meek, demure, once joined, the contrary she proves, a thorn intestine, far within defensive arms, a cleaving mischief in his way to virtue adverse and turbulent, or by her charms draws him awry, enslaved with dotage and his sense depraved, to folly and shameful deeds which ruin ends. What pilot so expert but needs must wreck, embarked with such a steered mate at the helmet? And therefore, says the chorus, 1053, God's universal law gave to the man despotic power over his female in due awe. Not from that right to part an hour, smile she or lower. So shall he least confusion draw on his own life, not swayed by female usurpation nor dismayed. Now, this assertion by the chorus does not match what Milton himself says in his own works. It doesn't. This is a strong assertion, and probably the knee-jerk reaction to what has just happened. Yes.
It says it refers back to Paradise Lost book 4.
Yes.
Where he says he forgot only, she forgot in him.
Yes.
And it makes reference that Milton believed that female subjection to man was established in creation.
Yes, but despotic power is tyranny. and he for her, he for God, she for God, and him. Think of how God rules over mankind. Is it with despotic power? God created mankind sufficient to have stood or free to fall. He created him to love, and love freely in response. The relation between husband and wife. So dark mind is aptly described because I don't think this is Milton's view. And the view articulated in Paradise Lost Book 4, that quotation, he for God, she for God, and him, is quoting scripture, right? And this, on the other hand, is a misogynist view expressed by the chorus, but I don't think it actually fits that description. But that would, I guess I'd have to make the argument. I am making the argument. Tyranny is only a negative thing. There is no positive description there, and there is no freedom, and there's not even agency granted to the subjects of tyranny. And I don't think that's how Adam and Eve are portrayed, nor how Samson has spoken of Delilah even up to this point. This is the chorus saying this. So I see it as more, it's appropriate to the context of the character and not a reflection of Milton's own view. Remember, the chorus reflects the view of the body politic. It's not meant to be the voice of wisdom, let alone Milton's voice. So this is the problem with, we have to make the case, maybe some will make a counter case. Websites, however, wherever they're associated, even with Cambridge University, are not to be seen as definitive. Neither am I, for that matter. By all means, question me. I'm making the case. But it seems to me to state what Scripture states is not to say that women are to be subject to men in the same way a slave is to a master. That's the master-slave dialectic of Hegel. That's not Scripture. And it's not what Milton has asserted in Paradise Lost, for that matter, even. But that's just my thought. But it's certainly true that in an age of egalitarian thinking, if there's any difference in degree, there's a natural assumption that one has all the power and the other has none. The one is God and the other is a nothing. That's the Roman view, really, where the pater familias has tyrannical power over his own household. Actually, if you're born to a Roman father, you are not a child until he adopts you in that age. Like, you can be a legitimate offspring, and you're not really legitimate in the sense that this is your father. Until he adopts you as an act later in life, you inherit nothing. See, and he can take your life at any point. That's despotic power. Is that how Milton portrays the relationship between men and women? I don't think so. I don't think so. But that's what it says here. Therefore, God's universal law gave to the man despotic power over his female in due awe. Now, I don't buy that for a minute. Yes. But I don't want to spend I want to get through this, but yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that, because you said, challenge me,
Any day.
I think recognizing how the patriarchy and living in a patriarchal culture and world influenced Milton's thinking as well as other Christians' thinking over the centuries isn't necessarily rejecting them completely as authors and really minds, but kind of denying that influence, I think brings more harm to the situation because you're denying something that did exist. I think there was sexism in Milton, and
Absolutely.
he was a product of his culture, and that's how it was, and still is in most parts of the world. But yeah, anyway, I just thought
Yes, but you don't have to.
not rejecting
but
his
no,
work. Yeah.
no, and Shakespeare will do the same thing. So he'll in Midsummer Night's Dream, which we looked at last year, the absolute right of the father over the son or of the daughter was that he was going to put his daughter to death. That was the law of old Athens. That is a patriarchal view. It's not the view of Shakespeare or the men of his day. It's not the view that's held. It's certainly not held by Shakespeare.
Yeah, there's definitely different degrees, right?
Absolutely, and there is such a thing as patriarchy, and there's also such a thing as matriarchy. the greater problem in our age, the lens through which we view every text in our day is egalitarian, which is that any difference of degree will be seen as a difference of kind. Right? So to say that Adam is Eve's head is to say that he's a superior type of being is never being asserted. Or that by making him her head that he is thereby the tyrant. Well, that's what the chorus says, but Milton never says that. So I'm just talking about being fair to the author and not taking every character assertion, particularly within a tragedy, as an assertion of the author's mindset. I think that's just fair to any author. Actually, all authors hate saying, look, I'm writing characters, I'm not telling you what like any one character represents my view. That's just not accurate. But anyway, true. Yeah, you don't have to support Milton's position by saying there's no such thing as patriarchy. I wasn't saying that either. I was saying that patriarchy does not entail despotism, which is what this says. So anyway, so she goes off, and now his next comforter comes on. Now his next comforter is actually the giant Harapha. Interesting to see him as a comforter, but he is of sorts. Now Harapha is much like Goliath, and a somewhat crestfallen Philistine giant comes to speak words of condolence to his vanquished opponent. And well, it's very interesting. Samson will accept none of it. Challenges him, in fact, 3 times, even in his state. But I'll go through this now. Who is this coming? The giant Harapha of Gath, 1068. His look haughty as his pile high built and proud. Comes he in peace? What wind hath blown him hither? I less conjecture than when first I saw the sumptuous Delilah floating this way. His habit carries peace, his brow defiance. Or peace or not, says Samson, to me alike to me he comes. His fraught we soon shall know. He now arrives. Harapha, I come not, Samson, to condole thy chance, as these perhaps yet wish it had not been, though for no friendly intent. I am of Gath. Men call me Harapha, of stock renowned as Og or Anak, and the Emims old that Kiriathaim held. Thou knowest me now, if thou at all art known. Much I have heard of thy prodigious might and feats performed, incredible to me. In this displeased, that I was never present on the place of these encounters, where we might have tried each other's force in camp or listed field. And now am come to see of whom such noise hath walked about, and each limb to survey if thy appearances answer loud report. So, Harapha, if I wish I'd met you when you were of your full strength, and then we would have seen who is the better man. Now I come to see you as you are. Samson, the way to know were not to see, but taste. You want to see how strong I am? Go ahead. Right? Dost thou already single me? I thought gyves and the mill had tamed thee. Oh, that fortune had brought me to the field where thou art famed to have wrought with such wonders with an ass's jaw. I should have forced thee soon wish other arms, or left thy carcass where the ass lay thrown. So had the glory of prowess been recovered to Palestine, won by a Philistine from the unforeskinned race, of whom thou bearest the highest name for valiant acts. That honor certain to have won by mortal duel from thee. I lose, prevented by thy eyes put out. So he's not going to fight a man who's got no eyes. Samson, once again, boast not of what thou wouldst have done, but do what then thou wouldst. Thou seest in thy hand. Harapha, To combat with a blind man I disdain, and thou hast need much washing to be touched. So there'll be three responses that Samson will give to his responses to Harapha, and each time he does, his moral strength grows, as does his physical strength. And he becomes convinced, and this is my general description, I'll look at the text in a second, he becomes more and more convinced through the encounter, through this agon, this struggle between him and other figures, and in this case Harapha, that there is a righteousness that comes from God which is still his, and he can draw upon it despite his physical infirmity. And when he does this, like the Greek tragic hero, he's simply saying it has been prophesied that this will happen. And just like if you think back to Oedipus the king, who was blinded at the end as well, it was stated that he would marry his mother and murder his father. It was stated, it is so, it's fated, it will necessarily be so. Similarly of Samson, he will be the deliverer of Israel. He's growing in his sense of his freedom to act, that he will trust in what God has prophesied. And that will be the means of his conviction, not in his physical strength anymore. He's already given that up by giving up his secret. He's lost his hair. What remains is his trust in God. That only grows as his strength wanes. So I'll give you a little snippet that will illustrate this. 1168. All these indignities, for such they are, from thine, these evils I deserve and more. He's just referred to the raising of his hair. Acknowledge them from God, inflicted on me. So note they're not from his enemies, they're actually directly from God. God has given them to me. God is the actual instrument of my sufferings. Ultimately. This is greatly encouraging. God has not abandoned him to his enemies. God is himself being the instrument, still using him. Acknowledge him from God, inflicted on me justly, yet despair not of his final pardon, whose ear is ever open, and his eye gracious to readmit the suppliant, in confidence whereof I once again defy thee to the trial of mortal fight, by combat to decide whose God is God, thine or whom I with Israel's sons adore. Fair honor, said Harapha, that thou dost thy God, in trusting he will accept thee to defend his cause, a murderer, a revolter, and a robber. And then Samson, tongue doughty giant, how dost thou prove me these? And what is his response? Is not thy nation subject to our lords? Their magistrates confess it, when they took thee as a league breaker and delivered bound into our hands. So that his own nation betrayed him, just like Israel will one day betray Christ and give him over to the Romans. Same here. For hadst thou not committed notorious murder on those 30 men at Ashkelon, who never did thee harm, then like a robber strips them of their robes. The Philistines, when thou hadst broke the league, went up with armed powers, thee only seeking, to others did no violence nor spoil. So he has all sorts of accusations being lodged at him. He defends himself from these. We'll skip over that and the ensuing discussion, but we will, he concludes it with, I'll look at just the few lines that close this dialogue between Harapha and Samson. 12:31. No, just before this, 12:27. Camest thou for this, vain boaster, to survey me, to descant on my strength, and give thy verdict? Come nearer, part not hence so slight informed, but take good heed my hand survey not thee. O Baal Zebub, can my ears unused hear these dishonors and not render death? No man withholds thee, nothing from thy hand fear I incurable. Bring up thy van. My heels are fettered, but my fist is free. This insolence other kind of answer fits. Go, baffled coward, lest I run upon thee, though in these chains, bulk without spirit, vast, and with one buffet lay thy structure low, or swing thee in the air, then dash thee down to the hazard of thy brains and scattered sides. a bulk without spirit, vast. So you may be a giant, but you've got the heart of a pygmy. And then Harapha, by Ashtaroth, ere long thou shalt lament these braveries and iron loaden on thee. And now he goes out, and the chorus's response, his giant ship is gone, somewhat crestfallen, stalking with less unconscionable strides and lower looks, but in a sultry chafe. I dread him not, nor all his giant brood, though fame divulge him father of 5 sons, all of gigantic size, Goliath, chief. He will directly to the Lord's, I fear, and with malicious counsel stir them up some way or other, yet further to afflict thee. Samson he must allege some cause, and offered fight will not dare mention, lest a question rise whether he durst accept the offer or not. And that he durst not, plain enough appeared. Much more affliction than already felt they cannot well impose, nor I sustain. If they intend advantage of my labors, the work of many hands, which earns my keeping with no small profit daily to my owners. But come what will, my deadliest foe will prove my speediest friend, my death to rid me hence. The worst that he can give, to me the best. Yet so it may fall out, because their end is hate, not help to me. It may with mine draw their own ruin who attempt the deed. Now note that. He's hinting at now, maybe they will try and assault me. Maybe they will do this. And the more that they do it, the more they will draw on their own end, which is exactly what shall happen. And the chorus's response, oh, how comely it is and how reviving to the spirits of just men long oppressed. So that we can see Samson's faith in God has increased through this little antagonism. The more he suffers, the more his faith grows and burns bright. And as I say, the righteousness that he senses, a righteousness not his own, but rather of God's. Now the point of catastrophe is soon to follow. It's I'll pick it up in 1356. This is the peripeteia, as Aristotle refers to it as the turning point of catastrophe, when Samson has been called to a festival and he refuses to go, to be an entertainment. Remember, it's the feast day of the God who has defeated the Israelites, and they want him to go out on display the power of their God over the Israelites' God. Samson won't do it. He doesn't know what he's going to do. Much like Adam, after he has fallen, he's not quite sure what to do. But he places himself in God's hand, and it is eventually revealed to him. So I'll pick it up at 1356. Or 34. 50. It's 56. 54. Shall I abuse this consecrated gift of strength, again returning with my hair after my great transgression? So requite, so he's noticing that his strength is returning just as his hair is. So requite favor renewed and add a greater sin by prostituting holy things to idols, a Nazarite in place abominable, vaunting my strength in honor to their Dagon? Besides, how vile, contemptible, ridiculous What act more execrably unclean, profane? And then the chorus, yet with this strength thou servest the Philistines, idolatrous, uncircumcised, unclean. And what's the chorus's response? Well, you're serving the Philistines already by grinding their grain for them. You're bringing them profit. Samson, not in their idol worship, but by labor honest and lawful to deserve my food of those who have me in their civil power. This is almost a political discussion. Is it permissible to eat food sacrificed to idols? It's almost engaging in that sort of level. Depends what is meant by it. Depends on the purpose. The chorus, where the heart joins not, outward acts defile not. Samson, where outward force constrains, the sentence holds. But who constrains me to the temple of Dagon? Not dragging the Philistine lord's command. Commands are no constraints. If I obey them, I do it freely, venturing to displease God for the fear of man, and man prefer. Set God behind, which in his jealousy shall never unrepented find forgiveness. Yet that he may dispense with me or thee present in temples at idolatrous rites for some important cause, thou needst not doubt. How thou wilt here come off surmounts my reach. And now Samson, as I say, as he dedicates himself in the dialogue to the Lord's cause, he starts to see the path open up before him. You say it's not clear at first, he won't go. As he discusses the matter with the chorus, his mind starts slowly to change. And with the officer that comes, Samson, be of good courage. I begin to feel some rousing motions in me, which dispose to something extraordinary my thoughts. I with this messenger will go along. Nothing to do, be sure, that may dishonor our law, or stain my vow of Nazarite. If there be aught of presage in the mind, this day will be remarkable in my life, by some great act, or of my days, the last. So again, God moves him somehow to do what he's just said he won't do, which is to go out in public. He won't do anything that contradicts his vows as a Nazarite. He won't drink to Dagon, anything like that. Won't commit any idolatrous acts, but he will go out. Why? He feels he should. God's moving him to do it. Chorus, in time thou hast resolved, the man returns. Samson, officer, this second message from our lords to thee I am bid say, art thou our slave, our captive at the public mill, our drudge, and darest thou at our sending and command dispute thy coming? Come without delay, or we shall find such engines to assail and hamper thee as thou shalt come of force, though thou wert firmlier fastened than a rock. Samson, I could be well content to try their art, which to no few of them would prove pernicious, yet knowing their advantages too many, because they shall not trail me through their streets like a wild beast, I am content to go. So the turning point, the peripeteia, is again at 1389. As I say, by some great act or of my days, the last. Now he knows. The act, the day has come upon him, whatever it's going to be. And there's a brief moment in which the tragic hero might be spared that intercedes here. Manoah, his father, the representation of human earthly love, wishes to save his son, comes in and seeks to stop this from happening. Manoah 14:45, peace with you, brethren. My inducement hither was not at present here to find my son, by order of the Lord's new parted hence, to come and play before them at their feast. I heard all as I came, the city rings and numbers thither flock. I had no will, lest I should see him forced to things unseemly. But that which moved my coming now was chiefly to give ye part with me what hope I have with good success to work his liberty, namely to buy, to ransom him. 1477, his ransom, if my whole inheritance may compass it, shall willingly be paid and numbered down. So Samson will be ransomed by his father. But as we see, the son himself will be the ransom for Israel. But there's the comforter of his father that will keep him from fulfilling God's providential aims for him as the deliverer. And in that sense, he's a bit like the Apostle Peter, who wants to say, no, you're not that. Not crucified and scourged in the public display. He would prevent him from doing this. Remember, our Lord says to him, get behind me, Satan. You have not in mind the things of God, but of men. Like Manoah. Of course you want to prevent me from this, but this I must do. And we hear then, and I'll pick it up. So there's a discussion between the chorus and Manoah, and the actual event takes place off stage. It's not witnessed. In keeping with the tragic pattern of the Greeks, that horrific acts do not happen on stage. Adam, did you have a comment or a question?
I was just going to ask, do you think Manoah is also like a Mary figure?
A Mary figure?
Yeah.
As in the mother of Jesus?
Well, yeah.
Why? Why do you say that?
Well, in a simple sense, not wanting son to die, but also just in the sense of, I don't know, just like this caring for their son, and just obviously having that compassion in a motherly sense.
Okay,
towards them.
first of all, from the gospel accounts, I have no recollection of Mary trying to stop.
No,
Okay.
It's more on, I guess. Yeah, it's more just on this idea of, as a sinner, Mary would place Christ on the cross, but as a mother, she would not want to see it.
Yes, but even when we say as a sinner, she would not do that. But I have no sense that she seeks to impede him. She's there at the end, witnessing it, weeping at it, but nonetheless not trying to stop it. I think Mary and the women who were the witnesses, the first witnesses, are the ones that actually are the most receptive to what Christ did. It's really interesting. And go back to the patriarchal comment that in a patriarchal age, the first witnesses of Jesus' resurrection were women. It is extraordinary because in a patriarchal age, the witness of women is not particularly valuable. If you're really going to want to provide a text that will support the authority of your claims, then and you're just creating a text, then the eyewitnesses are going to be men, right? But they're women. Why would they be women? Well, because they actually were women. Well, why would God use women in that sense? I mean, the answer is not given in the text, but it does beg the question. First of all, because it must happen that way, but secondly, because the women were, maybe because of the patriarchal culture, less proud. Certainly Mary was remarkable for her faithfulness and humility, an extraordinary woman. The Catholic Church makes much of Mary. Protestants tend not to, but what a woman she must have been. Compare her and contrast her with the wise old Simeon. It's like they're wise. Look at her wisdom; far exceeds theirs. It's extraordinary. Chorus. So I sort of see what you mean, but Manoah actually seeks to prevent it from happening, as a father would do in his worldliness. So he does represent worldliness. Mary does not represent worldliness. She is an instrument for the Lord. May it be as you have said, says Mary. She knows that this will be her deliverer. This is the king. Doubtless, says the chorus, 1473, the captive shouting to be, just one line before this. Manoah, they're talking along, and then he says, "What noise or shout was that? It tore the sky." Chorus, doubtless the people shouting to behold their once great dread, captive and blind before them, or at some proof of strength before them shown. His ransom, says Manoah, if my whole inheritance may compass it, shall willingly be paid and numbered down. Much rather I shall choose to live the poorest in my tribe than richest, and he that in calamitous prison left. No, I am fixed not to part hence without him. For his redemption all my patrimony, if I need be, I am ready to forgo and quit. Not wanting him, I shall want nothing. Chorus, fathers are wont to lay up for their sons. Thou for thy son art bent to lay out all. Sons wont to nurse their parents in old age. Thou in old age carest how to nurse thy son, made older than thy age through eyesight lost. I shall be, Manoah, it shall be my delight to tend his eyes and view him sitting in the house, ennobled with all these high exploits by him achieved, and on his shoulders waving down those locks that of a nation armed the strength contain. And I persuade me, God had not permitted his strength again to grow up, with his hair garrisoned round him like a camp of faithful soldiery, were not his purpose to use him further yet in some great service. Great irony here, by the way, because he just has. Not to sit idle with so great a gift, useless and thence ridiculous about him, and since his strength with eyesight was not lost, God will restore him eyesight to his strength. Chorus, thy hopes are not ill-founded, nor seem vain of his delivery, and thy joy thereon conceivable, agreeable to a father's love, in both which we as next participate. I know your friendly minds, and oh, what noise! Mercy of heaven! What hideous noise was that? Horribly loud, unlike the former shout. Noise, call you it, or universal groan, as if the whole inhabitation perished. Blood, death, and deathful deeds are in that noise. Ruin, destruction at the utmost point. A parallel here, the universal groan in 1508, like that in Paradise Lost, Book 9, when earth felt the wound. When Adam completes Eve's sin. And the groan, there's almost the earth crying out at the calamity. And then a messenger enters the scene, and what we see here is technically spoken of as sticomythia. Which is used to present to the reader a sense of urgency and emotional fervency. So brief exchanges, as you would do, like when you're really, there's a one-line question and a one-line answer, and back and forth and back and forth. Commonly used amongst the tragedians. Milton employs it here. So of ruin indeed methought I heard the noise, or oh, it continues, they have slain my son. Then the chorus, thy son is rather slaying them. That outcry from slaughter of one foe could not ascend. Some dismal accident it needs must be. What shall we do? Stay here or run and see? And then the messenger comes in. We'll find out, is it of good or bad? 1537. Of good or bad? So great, of bad the sooner. For evil news rides post, while good news baits. And to our wish I see one hither speeding, an Hebrew, as I guessed, and of our tribe. Here's the messenger. Oh, whither shall I run? Or which way fly the sight of this so horrid spectacle, which erst my eyes beheld and yet behold? For dire imagination still pursues me. But providence or instinct of nature seems, or reason, though disturbed and scarce consulted to have guided me aright, I know not how. To thee first, reverend Manoah, and to these my countrymen, whom here I knew remaining, yet as at some distance from the place of horror, so in the sad event too much concern. And then Manoah, the accident was loud, and here before thee with rueful cry, yet what it was we hear not. No preface needs, thou seest, we long to know. It would burst forth, says the messenger, but I recover breath, and sense distract, to know well what I utter. Tell us the sum, the circumstance defer. Gaza yet stands, but all her sons are fallen. All in a moment overwhelmed and fallen. Sad, but thou knowest to Israelites not saddest the desolation of a hostile city. Feed on that first. There may in grief be surfeit. Relate by whom? By Samson. That still lessens the sorrow and converts it nigh to joy. Ah, Manoah, I refrain too suddenly to utter what will come at last too soon, lest evil tidings with too rude eruption, hitting thy aged ear, should pierce too deep. Suspense and news is torture. Speak them out, then take the worst in brief. Samson is dead. The worst indeed. Oh, all my hopes defeated to free him hence. But death, who sets all free, hath paid his ransom now and full discharge. What windy joy this day I conceived, hopeful of his delivery, which now proves abortive as the firstborn bloom of spring, nipped with the lagging rear of winter's frost. Yet ere I give the reins to grief, say first, how died he? Death to life is crown or shame. All by him fell, thou sayest? By whom fell he? What glorious hand gave Samson his death's wound? Unwounded of his enemies he fell. Wearied with slaughter then, or how? Explained, by his own hands. Self-violence, what cause brought him so soon at variance with himself among his foes? Inevitable cause, at once both to destroy and be destroyed, the edifice where all were met to see him, upon their heads and on his own he pulled. O lastly overstrong against thyself, a dreadful way thou tookst to thy revenge. More than enough we know, but while things yet are in confusion, give us, if thou canst, eyewitness of what first or last was done, relation more particular and distinct. I'm coming to an end here. So the commentary here, there the references in 1735 and onwards to a laurel and a palm, the laurel being a symbol of victory and triumph, the palm a symbol of victory likewise, the victory in defeat, again an anticipation or a type of the cross, the victory won through the great defeat, a sort of a resurrection, and with that an understanding of defeat as a way and an attempt to understand God's will for allowing it all to happen. So that then the chorus and the semi-chorus alternate between them to give us a sense of what has just transpired. And an assertion of eternal providence and a justification of the ways of God to men. Here, as was the case in Paradise Lost. It's the last lines. The chorus, I'll let the chorus speak the last words. All is best, though we oft doubt, what the unsearchable dispose of highest wisdom brings about, and ever best found in the close. Oft he seems to hide his face, but unexpectedly returns, and to his faithful champion hath in place bore witness gloriously, whence Gaza mourns, and all that band them to resist his uncontrollable intent. His servants he with new acquist of true experience from this great event, with peace and consolation hath dismissed, and calm of mind all passion spent. He concludes with rhyme. Fascinating. A sense of reassertion of order, represented even in the meter. Very unusual for Milton's verse, as we've seen thus far. Tends to use blank verse. Here he uses rhyme at the end to suggest as the tragedy always does, justice has been done, order has been reasserted. God's providence in this case has been enacted through the deliverer Samson, as was prophesied. Milton's message. So even in apparent defeat, Milton's life has not been lived in vain, and God will bring about the victory by his means. So that's how he concludes that. So I will stop that.